Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This is our seventh webinar in our EHS educational series today. Today's topic is implementing ISO 45001. It's going to be presented by my colleague, Glen Bianchi. Glen's been with us at EnSafe for 12 years. He serves as our auditing service line lead, and he has extensive experience in auditing and in safety and health management system implementation. I will ask that if you do have questions today, please use the Q&A function that's at the bottom of your Zoom screen there. Type your question, and then we will answer those at towards the end of the presentation. With that, I'll turn it over to Glen.
Thanks, Leo. Thank you all for taking the time to join us. Shout out to my friend across the pond in the UK for joining as well. Good to see you, Ian. As Leo indicated, our topic today is ISO 45001 overview and implementation. A couple of our previous presentations, our feedback said, hey, we don't necessarily know who you are, so who are you? So I'll just take one quick second to tell you a little bit about EnSafe. We're based in Memphis, Tennessee, employee-owned company, about 330 people, 23 locations across the U.S., covering all the disciplines in EHS consulting. Some of our clients right now across a wide variety of government and industry. Again, just a sampling of some of our clients. All right, that said, let's jump in here. Our agenda today is to talk about options in safety management systems. What's the safety management system do for us? What's the benefits of it? And then delve into ISO 45001 and particularly focus on some of the key elements of 45001, particularly those that differ from OHSMS 18001, which is probably the one we're most familiar with, and then talk about steps to implementing if you choose to go down that path. So benefits of a safety management system. You know, there's several of them out there, and they all ultimately function the same, as to provide a sustainable framework to manage safety programs, risk, prevent employee injuries, illnesses, fatalities, provide a mechanism to identify hazards and risks, improve performance, and drive continuous improvement. One of the benefits of 45001, ISO 45001, is it's internationally recognized. Looking at the options out there, safety management systems have been around for a while. Here in the US, we've got the OSHA VPP program that's been around since 1982, and is quite popular amongst large sites, union sites, enjoys a good union support. The OSHA Safety and Health Program Management Guidelines came out in 2000, or most recently updated in 2015, originally came out in '89, built on best practices of VPP, but that's more of an advisory informational structure. There's one of the nice things out of it for US-based companies is it also provides a map of those management system elements to applicable regulatory requirements, which is useful. Third one here in the US is the ANSI AHA ASSP Z10 standard. This is actually quite similar to OHSMS 18001 and ISO 45001, with focus on management leadership roles, employee participation, management change, root cause analysis, and continual improvement. It's more of a self-certifying management system, and the negative is that you get the internal benefit, but there's no real outside recognition for that standard. On the international side, we've been living with OHSMS 18001 for quite some time. It was last updated in 2007 with the intent of better aligning with ISO 14001 and ISO 9001 quality standard. Originally a British standard, but now as of March of 2018, we've got ISO 45001. So we now have something that directly aligns and partners with ISO 14001, the environmental management standard, and ISO 9001, the quality management standard. So ISO 14001, it's a management system, safety management system. It's a bunch of interrelated elements for an organization that establishes our policies, objectives, and a process to achieve those objectives. As we talked about before, reducing injuries, illnesses, or preventing injuries and illnesses, and continually improving our process. Differences from 18001, there's several. 18001 had different structure, some different definitions, and didn't delve quite as deeply into some of the topics that 45001 did, and we'll look at those in some detail. Again, here's the 10 clauses of 45001, and the big benefit here, it shares the definitions, the structure of 10 clauses, and the core text with ISO 14001 and ISO 9001. So for organizations that already have those in place and have had those in place for a while, implementing 45001 is quite easy and aligns nicely. That core structure and core text is called Annex L. Prior to last year, you may have heard that referred to as Annex SL, but it's now referred to as Annex L. And again, it makes things quite familiar with people on the environmental side and the quality side to port and integrate with the safety management system. So next we'll review several of the clauses 45001 and some particular requirements out of those that are notable, that, and some of these are different from OHSM 18001. Again, I'm kind of bouncing off 18001 because that's been pretty well established and most people are familiar with that. So clause 4, this is different from and new from 18001, looks at context of the organization. This is really an exercise where you have to be totally honest and get a cross section of the organization and bring out what are the factors and conditions that affect the operation of the organization and that would affect the implementation of a safety management system. Some of those are regulations, the governance of the company, the stakeholders. Another piece of this is needs and expectation of workers and other interested parties, which could be the regulatory entities that are out there. And some of these may be overlap with legal and other requirements. Amongst workers and interested parties, they may be, obviously the employees, customers is the biggest interested party, other shareholders, board members, even competitors, and industry peers. So again, different than 18001, and some of this sets the context of how we build the management system, how we plan for improvement, and how we communicate, and even in risk assessment. Clause 5, leadership. This gets into way more detail than 18001. There's 13 clear and very specific expectations for top management. And unlike earlier versions of 18001, you can't delegate responsibility for safety to somebody. This is a clause that you really need to talk to your top management about and be clear before you take this journey down 45001 implementation is, are they prepared to do these things? Because when you go for registration, they're going to look for objective evidence that your top management is doing these things. And this is just a sampling of them, but they're pretty explicit, taking overall responsibility, accountability, ensuring the policy and objectives are established and aligned with the strategic direction of the whole organization, ensuring resources are available, financial and personnel. I like this one, ensuring other management roles, supporting other management roles to demonstrate their leadership in the management system. Anybody that's been out in manufacturing or operations knows that you may have one or two leaders that get behind your what you're trying to do here, but there's always going to be those one or two out there that don't want to play along. I had a great example in one of my careers where I had one of the business unit managers that was a lead on our site. He held his peers accountable to step up and play in our EHS management system, and it was a beautiful thing. 45001 explicitly expects this out of top leaders. Ensuring integration of the management system into the business processes. This isn't standalone. EHS function has a bad rap sometimes, trying to do our own thing. We're not tuned into the business. We're not aligned with the business objectives. 45,001 is very explicit about integrating the safety management system into the business processes and business objectives. It's expecting a top manager to be a communicator around the importance of the OHSMS and the culture, safety culture. And this was ensuring intended outcomes are achieved. That's all about accountability, driving accountability, hold other people accountable. So these are 7. There's an additional 6 specific requirements. I didn't want to make this too much of an eye chart, but these are some of the key ones that are clear expectations of top leaders. Clause 6 around planning. This is where the hazard identification risk assessment comes in. They talk about that being ongoing and proactive. Hazard identification risk assessment is woven through the whole standard and shows up in other places like legal and other requirements and risk assessment for maintaining compliance, emergency planning. Emergency planning also includes things that aren't under the control of the organization. So it's one thing that's really pertinent right now is when your employees are off your site, which so many of us are right now, what are the risks from a safety standpoint of somebody being off site? It's one thing we kind of knew people traveling for work and that, but now we got people working at home, and that presents different risks that need to be considered. Risk assessment shows up in management change, and investigation, things like that. Clause 5, 7, and within 7.5 is documented information. Difference here, 45,001 throughout the standard. There are 22 very specific clauses and subclauses that specify documented information is required. So this is where you need something tangible to show somebody that you're documenting what you do. And that's really just the beginning. There's lots of things where documented information is implied. So this is a challenge here, and this becomes really important when you're going for registration and demonstrating you're doing what you say you do and having that documented information. The other things around document control, revision control, availability is all similar to 18,001. Clause 8 in operations. This brings in and specifies hierarchy of controls. Hierarchy of controls comes in a number of places throughout the standard, including risk assessment. When you talk about implementing controls, it specifies implementing or using the hierarchy controls. In operations, there's elements of planning as well. Management of change is here, which is, again, our process to capture and address potential sources of safety impact for the planned changes to the operation. Also within operations, we include controls related to purchasing, equipment and services, and procurement. Outsourcing is mentioned here that's not mentioned in 18,001. What tasks that would normally be done by the organization that are outsourced, and what's the safety implication of those? And contractors and contractor safety is consistent with 18,001. In clause 10, it includes incident nonconformity and corrective action. One of the new terms that's introduced here in 45,001 that isn't explicit in 14,001 is root cause, which is good to see. Many of us, with the manufacturing environment, with continuous improvement process are very familiar with root cause. So it's good to see that here in 45,001. So that may make some adjustments as far as our incident investigation processes and how we document incidents and incident investigations to include root cause. So that's just some dabbling in some of the interesting pieces that are different from maybe what we're used to in management systems. So I want to talk about implementation. First off, just the idea that implementation of ISO 45,000 was a strategic and operational decision. This is not something that the EHS or safety group is going to say, hey, we want to do this and try and drag the business along. Going down this path really needs to be seen as a strategic and operational benefit to the organization that the entire organization is going to get behind. Otherwise, the effort and the resources and the involvement of people aren't going to happen. So I've broken this down into a number of steps here. First one is that leadership mandate, and that goes to that strategic decision. You have to have top leadership on board with this and out front with it. They need to be the ones saying, "Hey, we are doing this, and everybody's going to participate." That clause 5 on leadership and worker participation. If the leader you have is not capable, or the leaders you have aren't capable of meeting those requirements, this isn't going to happen. So that's why this is step one. You have to get past this and get buy-in and commitment from the top management to start the journey. Step 2 is a gap assessment. Anybody that's got a safety process, has procedures, has written programs, has training, has goals and objectives, and some kind of planning process, has a safety management system. Question is, how much does that align with ISO 45001? So step 1 is that gap assessment. What do we have that's working that aligns? What doesn't align? And that becomes your action plan for the following steps and for implementation. When we do a 45,000 gap assessment, we also like to do a compliance assessment as well. And that's your baseline compliance assessment, and also develops your legal and other requirements inventory, which is one of the things that needs to be identified. So along with your management system stuff, this identifies your weaknesses in your regulatory compliance requirements, legal and other requirements. Step 3, we put together training and employee participation. This is where you start to bring people together, train employees at all levels to the requirements of the standard and what their roles and responsibilities will be in the safety management. This is where you start establishing that employee participation and consultation. And the difference there, participation is exactly what it says. What do employees at all levels, how do they participate in the safety process? That can be, doing risk assessments, audits and inspections, the stuff that they do on a routine basis in their jobs to verify safety controls are working on a machine, or keeping their area clean, managing chemicals properly. All those are part of an employee's participation in the safety process. Consultation is where you're actually getting their input on changing the process. So that it goes beyond participation. During this process, as you bring people together and train them on the process, a perfect time to go through that exercise to define the context of the organization. We talked about all those features that either will help us or be hindrances in implementing the safety management system, and understanding those, and where there are hindrances, how do we get around those? Again, during that process, you're also defining the scope of the management system. What does it apply to? Put the fences around what it applies to. This is particularly important for geographically dispersed organizations, or organizations where some of your people are, out in the field and out and about at customer sites, or traveling, and you really need to understand what the scope of the management system is and what you're going to try and cover. You get to define that scope. And the last piece, as you're going through all this, is document it. How are we implementing the management system? This is the say what you do piece in defining that, so that everybody's on the same page. Step 4, putting together tools and accountability. They're two different things, but kind of time-wise and maturity-wise, these go together. So first one is obtaining the tools. As you go through that gap assessment, both for the management system and for compliance, you may find that you need tools that you don't currently have. One I see pretty commonly is, how do we manage training and competency? Do we have a learning management system, or is this a big Excel spreadsheet someplace? That Excel's great for a lot of things. You start managing training and competence, it's really, really hard to get your hands truly around training and competence through an Excel spreadsheet. It may be corrective action tracking. Do we have an electronic means to track corrective actions, make them visible, and communicate people what the requirements are? Some kind of enhanced tool to do that might be deemed to be important. Risk assessment process. Do we have tools to do risk assessments and link that to corrective action tracking? Maybe to a dashboard so we have visibility. That becomes one of our key performance indicators is to completing risk assessments, completing corrective actions on time. Do we have the electronic tools to make that stuff visible to us? On the accountability side, this is where we start talking about setting goals and objectives for the safety program. Determining what our key performance indicators are. There's nothing in the standard that talks about key performance indicators, but it does ask us to establish a measurement process so that we know that our management system is effective and working properly. A lot of people struggle with what the right metrics are. I mean, the safety folks were usually stuck with the typical injury rates, comp costs, things of that nature. Those are all horribly lagging indicators that are no indication of the effectiveness of the safety program. Those are more, indication of dumb luck sometimes. So we're setting goals, objectives, and performance indicators. We want to look at leading indicators that are going to show the proactive things that people are doing to make sure the safety management system is operating effectively. And then, with all accountability, clearly establish and communicate accountability within the management system. Who's responsible for what? Hold people accountable, from top management down through all levels of the organization, whether it's built into job descriptions or a performance evaluation process, build in those things that reflect individuals at each level's role in the safety management system. The guts that cuts across all the management system is hazard identification and risk assessment, implementing this process. We're safety folks, call it a JSA, JHA, HIRA. This process should be in all of our tool belts here. So it's establishing a consistent process for identifying hazards and then calculating risks to determine if we've got adequate controls in place, and implementing that across all the processes and other things that impact the safety management. The focus is on risk reduction, and some of the lessons learned when you're implementing this, get a cross section of people involved, and get some quick wins. Start with some kind of easy processes just to learn the mechanics of doing a risk assessment, and then get some meaty stuff in there. And it's important that management be willing to step up and make changes in processes where the risk assessment says, hey, we don't have adequate controls. And that is such great encouragement for people when they see things starting to happen and say, hey, this process is working. It is value added, and we get some quick wins, and the team kind of goes on. Grow that skill set of people who are familiar with risk assessments. One of the challenges we face as safety professionals doing risk assessments is getting consistency, right? So, build that skill set of people, make sure we're doing it, a consistent process, and get some wins. And people need to understand risk assessment. You're not done. You're never done with risk assessment. Once you make those changes, go back, reevaluate it, rescore it, show that you've reduced risk. And again, we've talked about it built into a whole bunch of the other elements and processes in safety where risk assessment is a critical piece of it. Step 6 is self-assessment. This is where we start monitoring the performance of the management system and doing things like monitoring legal and other requirements. So this is setting up an audit inspection process. One of the things the standard talks about is your internal audit of the management system, and how we schedule that and how we cover all of the requirements in our management system over a course of a 3-year period. And with any self-assessment process, audit inspection process, we've got to look at the results, analyze them. What do they mean? Get to root cause and track corrective actions and verify effectiveness. It doesn't work to just, completed the inspection, done, move on, I'll do another one next month. What were the results? Did we correct things? Have we gotten a root cause? Are we, the measure is of root cause is we're not going to see those same things happening month after month after month in those inspections and audits. Step 7 is management review. Once you start doing this plan, do, check, act cycle, we need to communicate back to the management team on what we're doing. The 45,001 standard has some very specific things that 18,001 didn't have about the inputs into the management review. There's 7 specific minimum topics that need to be included in that management review, and 8 specific minimum decisions or determinations that need to be documented coming out of the management review. And if you choose to go get registered, they're going to look at these. And how do you document your management review process and document what's coming out of it? And then again, those actions that come out of the management review go into your action tracker and validate that they are completed and they are effective. So management review is key. And once you do that, you've gotten into the cycle, and if you choose, you can get registered. Certainly not required. You get all the benefits of implementing the system if you don't get registered, but quite often there are external drivers that may drive an organization to want to get registered. Maybe they're a supplier to some of the big major multinational companies, and they're driving that and wanting to see it as they did for 9,000 or 14,000 years ago. So if you choose to go and get registered, some of the things you want to plan on is shop around for registrars. There's a bunch of people out there that are approved registrars, and they are different. They're different on their customer service, their cost, and their ease to work with. So do some shopping about who your registrar might be. If you're already 14,000 or 9,000 registered, you want to go with the same registrars. That is going to simplify things because they know your processes and know your people. But if this is something standalone, by all means, go shopping for a registrar. You want to do that 6+ months ahead of when you think you're going to be ready to go. The process will typically include a contract with a registrar that's at least 3 years out, because if they're going to be your registrar, they're going to be recertifying you and doing your surveillance audits and stuff like that. So they're going to want to contract you to cover that whole scope of services. 2 to 3 months ahead of your registration assessment, you're going to do a pre-assessment review. They will come in very briefly and kind of do a 30,000-foot review of your safety management system and offer any suggestions. One thing about registrars, they work for you. They're there to work for you. You are paying them. It's in their best interest that you're successful. They're not out to get you, but they have to maintain their standing. They are reviewed to maintain their accreditation to be registrars. So I find that registrars are definitely going to work with you, and they're going to want you to be successful. But as registrars and auditors, there's a separation between consulting to tell you how to do it and auditing you to the standard to make sure you conform. And there's definitely a separation of church and state with those things with the auditors, but they're there to make sure you're successful. So that pre-assessment review is important. The registration assessment, again, depending on the size of the operation, plan for 6 or 8 man days, 2 or 3 auditors for your initial audit. They're going to find stuff wrong. Last year, we had one of our clients achieve registration 45,001. They were the first municipal organization in the country to get 45,001 registered, which is really cool. They had 6 minor nonconformances. The registrars indicated that was actually extraordinarily good. Even for people going 18,000 to 45,001, they were seeing 1 or 2 majors and 6 to 8 to 10 minor nonconformances during an initial registration assessment to 45,001. So there are things that they will come up with that are going to be deficiencies to the standard. That doesn't mean you don't get registered. You're going to have to come up with a response that includes a root cause analysis of what the deficiency is and what your corrective action plan is. And if that is sufficient, they will provide you your registration. It might be conditional, depending on the level of the nonconformances. They may want to come back in 2 or 3 months and reassess you to make sure the corrective actions are effective, and in that time issue a registration. But again, if it's just minor stuff, they'll They'll probably accept your corrective action plan if good, and then issue the registration. And then there's annual surveillance audits after that. So hopefully you're successful, and as a safety professional, you now bask in the benefits of a robust safety program. You know, we all think we're going to do ourselves out of a job someday by reducing risk and eliminating injuries and all that, which never happens. But the ultimate benefit is a better life for us as safety pros, and for the employees we service, and the management team we partner with, and making the business run better. So having a nice, robust, sustainable safety program is a value all in it to itself. So those are the steps to get there. I guess any questions?
Hey, Glenn, thank you. Yeah, nice job. We've got one question right now, and it is, I've seen many management systems, particularly quality systems, but also some safety, that seem to have a focus on development of formal written procedures. But reading 45,001, it doesn't stress that. In fact, it defines a procedure as something that can be written or unwritten. What's your take on this?
Yes, it's a great question. You know, 45,001 in a lot of respects is not super prescriptive on how you do some of this stuff. So it's really, I mean, that goes back to the context of your organization and what works for your organization. You know, some of the industry I've been in, it's very prescriptive, and we're all about procedures and levels of procedures and work instructions, and everything's documented. You know, that doesn't apply to everybody. It's really what's going to work for your operation. Certainly anything that's critical to the operation probably should be documented, whether it's compliance critical or risk critical. So, you know, a formal procedure might be appropriate. You know, maybe something graphical is better. You know, the hazardous waste generator improvement rules talking about contingency plans. You know, there's now a requirement for these more simplified quick response guides, which are much more helpful and useful than a 3-ring binder to get to the point of what you need to do for that situation. So yeah, it's you really have to go back to the context of your organization and what's going to work for your organization. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a bunch of formal procedures. Maybe it's a mix of formal procedures, visuals, or informal procedures. Again, it's, you know, based on risk and what's going to work for your organization.
Thank you. If anybody has any more questions, we still got a few minutes left here. Please submit them on the Q&A function. Got one here. Or a couple of them actually. What advice would you give about picking 45,001 over VPP if an organization is choosing one?
Good question. You know, we do a ton of VPP work with a wide variety of clients, and you know, VPP has a very big focus on employee participation and employee teams, and you know, has less emphasis on some of the other stuff. You know, it's going to be less emphasis on the leadership things, for example. Wow, it's a great question. Again, I'd have to defer back to, you know, the context of your organization and what's going to work. You know, needs and expectations of employees and stakeholders. You know, I'd go back to your employees and say, hey, you know, this is what VPP is about, and the advantages, strengths and weaknesses. This is what ISO 14000 is about, strengths and weaknesses. And again, you've got a lot of leeway in how you implement stuff. So you can still do 45,001 and get that international recognition, and still have, you know, a super strong employee participation and consultation that you get out of VPP. You know, VPP it's outside the U.S. people aren't going to know VPP. So again, what is your business? What are your drivers to go do this? And is that recognition important? Or, you know, is that partnership with OSHA getting VPP important? So I can't say that I'd recommend one or the other. It's really what's important to your organization and what's driving you to implement a formal management system. You know, we work with clients where they've gotten in trouble with OSHA, and you know, they have to come to a table with a plan, and that plan might be, hey, you know what, we're going to implement VPP. OSHA loves that. All depends what's driving you.
Okay. Another question. What are the most pros that can convince the organizations to go through this program?
The pros?
Yes. So I guess if you're trying to sell this perhaps to your C-suite, what are some big pros you can use to help convince people that they need to go through this?
It's alignment with quality. It's alignment with environmental. It's driving continuous improvement. I think those would be the big three right there.
Okay.
If you're driving continuous improvement and safety, depending on what your track record is, that could be driving some cost down associated with injuries and comp. It's creating that business alignment with things like quality and environmental and if there's a continuous improvement culture, you're lockstep in continuous improvement.
Okay. We have another question. So this person represents a small private facility without any previous ISO certifications. And he asked, how difficult would this be to be implemented? And should there be another safety or ISO-like certification implemented before 45001?
So if you're a small organization, so there's two questions there. How difficult is it to implement? For a small organization, I wouldn't say it's probably easier than a big organization, because theoretically a small organization is easier to get a smaller number of people on board. Is there anything else that need to be implemented before 45,000? No. I mean, the beauty of these is they can be implemented as standalone standards. Conversely, the beauty is they can be done together and complement each other.
Well, and Ian actually commented that ISO 9001, 14,001, 45,001 can be integrated. He acknowledges that they have an integrated management system, and it helps save funding too if you integrate the three together.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're registered, so there's registration costs, you're not doing them separately as individual registrations. Eventually you get together as a single joint registration, you save a little bit of cost there. And again, where you start talking the same language around risk assessment, and well, geez, maybe quality picks up on risk assessment, and you work together on a similar risk assessment process to reduce risk of poor quality, which is tied with safety. So yeah, I mean, I think that's the real beauty of it for companies that want to have an environmental management system, a quality management system, and safety management system. The three of these things are totally complementary.
Okay. We have a question about 5.1 leadership and commitment. And Scott acknowledges that many organizations may struggle with this, even with driven business need to be certified. How can a health and safety team attempt to overcome this based on your experience? That is, this leadership and commitment component.
If you enjoy pushing a rope, as a function, we get a bad rap for kind of not being integrated with the business and kind of being off on our own. That's why I started with step one and a management commitment. The top management needs to understand what's expected of them. And, if they can't do it, and just culturally they can't do it, or personally they just can't put their heart into it and commit to it, then, don't go for registration. You can implement the system and implement all the good pieces to it, and maybe you don't get the full benefit of the leadership commitment. But, safety pros, we got to be supporting our leaders and showing them the value to them. As a leader, you want to be visible, right? You want to show your value to the organization. You want to be seen as driving good things to the organization. And this is, the safety management system is just one piece of that. So, if they're about continuous improvement and caring about their employees, they can wrap themselves in safety as part of that, and maybe that's the way to bring them to the table. If they don't care about those things, then getting registered to the standard probably isn't something that's going to happen. So I mean, it's not a good answer. It's reality. You have to have that dynamic personality that truly believes in safety to be that leader to make this happen.
Yeah, I'll add with any management system or major safety related initiative, if you're if the senior leadership in your organization is not talking about it openly among the workforce, it's not going to get the traction that it needs to be successful. I think as safety professionals, many of us would have probably seen that or understand that. Another question here: are there good training courses out there for 45,001?
Yeah, there are. ASSP actually offers one that's just kind of an overview of 45,001. Several of the registrar classes. If you're looking to go down this path, I'd recommend taking one of the internal auditor classes. You need some familiarization with the standard ahead of that, but taking an auditor class really delves into the nuances of the standard and helps you understand what the standard is looking for. And again, if you're implementing it, you're going to have to do internal audits of self-assessment of the management system. So that qualification is good to have anyway. So several of the registrars offer those classes for internal auditors. That would be my recommendation. I don't know that any one's better than the other, but that would be a good way to bring up your competency on 45,001 or 14,001 is to take an internal auditor class.
Good advice. Thank you. I don't have any other questions at this time. So if anybody has any final questions, please submit those now. I'll make a few final remarks here. So this is the 7th webinar in our summer educational series. We have one more next week. All 6 of the previous webinars are viewable on our website. So if you and or your colleagues wish to see those, they are readily available there. We will email certificates of attendance to all those that registered for this webinar, and you'll get those within the next few days. And when this webinar ends today, I will send out an email with a link to a very brief survey, 4 questions. If you could please just provide a little bit of feedback. It only takes less than a minute to complete the survey. That would be greatly appreciated. And yeah, next week's topic is proposed 2020 NPDES multi-sector general permits. So on behalf of Glenn, thank you everybody for attending today, and hope to see some of you next week. Have a great day, and I'll end the webinar now.